Have you ever wondered how entire armies cross continents, braving deserts and unknown lands to fight in battles that determine the fate of nations? The Crusades, more than religious confrontations, were milestones in military history, where strategies and tactics shaped every movement on the battlefield. Over the centuries, commanders had to master not only the art of war, but also logistics to keep their troops supplied and ready to face the enemy in hostile and challenging regions. In this video, we're going to explore these war strategies. From the combat tactics used in ambushes and pitched battles to the logistical strategies that allowed armies to advance across vast distances. And if you're someone who appreciates planning and wants to understand how these lessons can still apply today in leadership, logistics, or crisis management, you're in the right place. Get ready to discover how medieval leaders faced nearly impossible obstacles. We'll dive into the most emblematic tactics used by legendary commanders and understand how they transformed the Crusades into one of the most strategic events in history. Stay with us and see how, in the end, these teachings remain as relevant as they were hundreds of years ago. Brief historical context. To understand the strategies and challenges of the Crusades, it's essential to delve briefly into the context that led to these epic conflicts. The Crusades were a series of military expeditions initiated at the end of the 11th century when the Catholic Church, under the command of Pope Urban II, called upon Christians in Europe to reclaim the Holy Land, primarily Jerusalem, which was under Muslim control. These conflicts were not solely about faith. They also reflected the complex political and social tensions of medieval Europe. At that time, many European kingdoms faced internal instability and conflicts among nobles. The idea of a holy war offered an outlet for these tensions, directing military fervor towards a common external objective. The Middle East, however, was an unknown territory for most of the Crusaders, with arid climates, vast deserts, and mountainous terrain that posed physical and logistical challenges. Moreover, the Crusaders encountered rich cultures and advanced civilizations in the East, especially in the Islamic Caliphate, where fortified cities, well-organized armies, and sophisticated military tactics were already well established. With this backdrop, the Crusades became not only a religious war, but a clash of cultures, knowledge, and combat styles. With this context in mind, we move on to understanding the specific challenges that shaped the tactics and war strategies of the Crusaders. Key logistical and strategic challenges. As the Crusaders ventured beyond the borders of Europe, they faced immense logistical and strategic challenges. Transporting thousands of men, animals, and supplies across long distances and unknown terrain was a colossal task. Crossing scorching deserts and facing rocky mountains and arid regions not only tested the troops' endurance, but also demanded extremely rigorous planning. One of the main logistical obstacles was the lack of water and adequate supplies. At a time when there were no food preservation technologies, keeping the armies supplied was a daily challenge. Many campaigns were compromised by the scarcity of basic resources like food and water, especially when supply routes were interrupted by enemy attacks or natural difficulties. Thus, controlling and securing these routes was vital for the success of the expeditions. Communication between the various army units was another major challenge. Amid the chaos of battles, commanders had to coordinate divided troops and maintain the organization of their formations. Without modern technology like detailed maps and rapid communication systems, armies relied on messengers and visual signals, which made communication limited and slow. Additionally, the Crusaders were in foreign territory, often without local allies to help recognize the terrain or provide information about adverse conditions. These difficulties directly influenced the strategies adopted, leading leaders to plan each movement precisely and avoid unnecessary combat. Overcoming these challenges required creativity and constant adaptation, lessons that shaped the combat tactics we will examine in the next chapter. Analysis of battle tactics used. During the Crusades, Crusader commanders had to develop and adapt their tactics to face enemy armies that already dominated the terrain and new sophisticated strategies. Among the main tactics, sieges of fortification stood out as one of the most used methods since the Crusaders encountered highly protected cities with imposing walls and well-established defense systems. Siege tactics were carefully planned and involved constructions like mobile towers, which allowed soldiers to climb the walls and invade the city from above. Battering rams were used to break gates, while trenches helped protect soldiers from external attacks during the process. In many cases, the Crusaders also blocked the supply of water and food to weaken the defenders' resistance, forcing them to surrender. These sieges could last months and required patience and perseverance from the troops, along with strong control over their own supplies. Another commonly used tactic was ambush. Crusader commanders had to adapt to terrain filled with valleys, ravines, and regions where ambushes were common. They employed tactics to disperse and surprise enemy troops, using the element of surprise to destabilize enemy front lines. A notable example is the Battle of Hattin, where Saladin, a Muslim leader, skillfully used the tactic of exhaustion, wearing down Crusader forces by drawing them into terrains where they suffered from a lack of water and intense heat. Unable to withstand the adverse conditions, the Crusaders were eventually defeated. Combat formation was another important factor. The Crusaders formed defensive and offensive lines with specific units, like archers, spearmen, and knights, positioned to maximize their impact in battle. Knights, for example, were used as a shock force, charging at the enemy with great impact and breaking defensive lines. Meanwhile, archers provided support from a distance, protecting the flanks and helping disperse enemy formations before the hand-to-hand combat. These combat tactics evolved over time, demonstrating the flexibility and adaptability of the Crusaders in the face of difficulties. Each battle was an opportunity to learn from mistakes and improve methods. Studying these tactics reveals the importance of strategic intelligence and the ability to improvise, qualities that define the victories and defeats in the Crusades. These skills, vital in the medieval context, still offer valuable lessons on strategy and adaptation. Logistics in the Crusades. Preparation and supply. Logistics was the backbone of any successful expedition in the Crusades. More than brute force or combat skill, the ability to keep troops well supplied and ready was what truly allowed campaigns to continue. Unlike modern conflict, medieval armies had to face not only the enemy, but also the constant threat of hunger, disease, and were due to a lack of resources. Transporting supplies was a complex operation that required preparation and a vast network of suppliers. In Europe, armies set out with loads of grain, dried meat, and even live animals that would be used as food along the journey. However, once they crossed into the Middle East, where the environment was harsher, the Crusaders often relied on local conquest to replenish their stockpiles, a risky practice that made them vulnerable to the territory's supply control. Moreover, drinking water was one of the most scarce and crucial resources, especially in the arid regions of Palestine. Many armies suffered severe losses due to a lack of access to clean water sources. To circumvent this problem, commanders had to carefully plan routes and ensure that troops rested near natural water sources, a challenge that required knowledge of the terrain and precise coordination. These logistical operations were critical, as failure to keep the army supplied could easily result in desertions, mutinies, or complete defeats. The interdependence between logistics and strategy became evident. Without supplies, combat tactics became useless, and the army was forced to retreat. Logistics, therefore, played a decisive role in the unfolding of the Crusades, showing that on the battlefield, victory often depended more on planning than on weapons. Strategic impact and legacy of the Crusades. The Crusades not only changed the course of medieval history, they also left a strategic legacy that continued to influence military practices for centuries. The cultural and military exchange between East and West provided an exchange of knowledge on war tactics, military engineering, and logistics that transformed European armies. Siege techniques, such as the use of mobile towers and trench building, became standard in later wars. Another significant legacy was the emphasis on logistics in military campaigns. The Crusades showed European commanders that the ability to manage supplies and resources was as important as strength on the battlefield. This focus on logistics continued to grow, influencing future military operations and solidifying itself as an essential element in any large-scale conflict. In addition to military innovations, the Crusades also left a profound cultural impact. Exposure to new architectural styles, such as Eastern fortresses and castles, inspired the construction of more robust defensive structures in Europe. Similarly, combat tactics and troop organization methods were adapted and refined. This strategic legacy of the Crusades was reflected in the formation of more organized and prepared armies, where logistical planning and the ability to adapt to terrain conditions were fundamental. In the end, these lessons and innovations continued to influence the art of war, proving that the lessons of the Crusades were not lost to time, but shaped the future of military campaigns. Modern application of Crusader strategies. Although they happened nearly 1,000 years ago, the strategies of the Crusades still offer lessons applicable to the modern world, both in military contexts and in areas like leadership and crisis management. Emphasis on logistics, for instance, is a principle that transcends the battlefield. Modern companies and organizations depend on efficient resource management and a robust supply chain, lessons that the Crusader commanders learned the hard way. Furthermore, adaptation to terrain and the ability to develop specific tactics for different situations are skills valued in many areas today. During the Crusades, leaders had to read the environment, understand limitations, and adjust their approaches. In the corporate world and leadership scenarios, the ability to respond to unexpected challenges and adapt strategies is essential for success. These lessons from the Crusades, while rooted in a medieval context, remain relevant, reminding us that effective strategy is universal. Adaptability, resilience, and careful logistical planning continue to be determining factors for success, whether in a military campaign, a modern company, or any large-scale project. The Crusades teach us that strategy, logistics, and adaptability are fundamental to any successful operation, whether military, organizational, or personal. Throughout this video, we explored how the Crusaders faced immense challenges with planning and innovation, leaving a strategic legacy that endures to this day. If you enjoyed this journey through the tactics and logistics of the Crusades, leave a comment sharing what stood out to you the most or your own reflections. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more content on history and strategy. See you in the next video.